Hey there, welcome to Watch Recap, and today, I will explain an action movie called Shaolin Wooden Men. Okay, so let's start. This is a story of a dumb orphan Shaolin Kung Fu student named Little Mute. He's new in the Shaolin monastery, so he struggles to keep up with the other students and to complete the difficult tasks given by his instructor. One day, the Shaolin master orders his students to fetch water from the river while wearing heavy iron shoes. He explains that in order to walk with the heavy shoes they must focus their strength on their feet. This task will make the students light as a feather, and so they will be able to walk on rooftops and water. Little Mute collects water from the river, but then he is challenged by his fellow students to reach the monastery before them. He accepts the challenge but is easily defeated by his classmates. Also, he slips on the steps and rolls down. He is demotivated by this, but then, he begins to think about his late father who was brutally murdered by a masked bandit. And this traumatized him so much that he went silent since then. He is then approached by a nun, who introduces herself as the Five Plums. She is a friend of Shaolin Master who lives in the Lotus Nunnery. She encourages Little Mute by reminding him about the Shaolin Kung Fu's long history, and also that it takes great determination and hard work to master it. As a result, Little Mute is filled with energy again and continues to finish the task. However, the master still scolds him as he finished last. Calling him lazy, he asks Little Mute to leave the monastery. Little Mute quickly falls down to his knees and apologizes to his master. He begs him to let him stay. The master finally allows him to stay, but orders him to chop wood as a punishment. Later, while chopping firewoods, he again gets lost in his thoughts while looking at the necklace which belonged to his late father. Suddenly, a drunken monk shows up and Little Mute gets back to work. The monk gives him a lesson about the Shaolin before leaving. The monk is so drunk he can't even walk properly. But then, Little Mute sees two suspicious men and decides to follow them. Following the two men, he goes inside a secret cave behind a waterfall, where he finds an imprisoned man, who is yelling at the two men who brings him food every day, ordering them to bring him wine. After the two monks leave, Little Mute helps the imprisoned man eat the food and so wins his trust. After finishing the food, the man asks Little Mute to bring him wine the next time he visits him. Later that night, the monastery's best student Young On challenges Wooden Men Lane, which is a narrow hallway where 36 Shaolin mechanical wooden dummies attacks anyone who comes inside. It is revealed that if someone defeats the Wooden Men, he can leave the Shaolin. Little Mute comes to watch the battle, but unfortunately, Young loses the fight and is badly injured. The master scolds him for overestimating his strength and will punish him when he will recover from the wounds. Next day, Little Mute saves a bun from his lunch for the imprisoned man, and he also steals some alcohol from the drunken monk. As expected, the prisoner is very happy with this and asks Little Mute to bring more wine the next time, but the prisoner also says that he will give him something too, in return for doing this much for him. He then asks him why the two monks didn't visit him today, and Little Mute reveals that Young fought the Wooden Men but lost the fight, and everyone was busy watching the fight. This makes the prisoner laugh as he finds it funny how someone can lose to a bunch of wooden dummies. He claims that if it was him, then he would have defeated the Wooden Men easily. Little Mute thinks the old guy is lying, but the prisoner explains he was imprisoned because he was practicing a new technique called Lion's Roar. And when he will master this technique, he will be able to break any metal just by roaring. The prisoner also says he will teach Little Mute how to defeat the Wooden Men, but only if he brings him more wine. So for this, Little Mute again tries to steal some wine from the drunken monk, but is caught. The monk beats him up and orders him to clean the kitchen every day as a punishment. So Little Mute spends the entire night cleaning, and surprisingly he impresses the monk by his work. The drunken monk gives him a fruit and tells him that his punishment is over now. Little Mute right away goes to meet the prisoner and gives him the fruit. The prisoner is happy and says that they met each other because of the fate, and also asks Little Mute what he has learned by now from the monastery. When Little Mute explains how he couldn't learn Kung Fu in the first 5 years in Shaolin, the prisoner asks him to ignore the stupid rules of the monastery and even offers to teach him real Kung Fu. They start right away with some basic moves, but Little Mute doesn't know he's secretly getting trained for the lion's roar technique. One day, the nun sees Little Mute practicing some killing techniques. Little Mute then requests her not to tell anyone about his secret. The nun explains that what he's practicing is indeed Shaolin, but a very brutal form of Shaolin, and that martial arts are a way to stay healthy and fit. She also tells him about a technique called the 8 snake steps, which she says is used for killing. The nun offers to teach him this technique, but this technique is opposite and against what the prisoner is teaching Little Mute. So now, Little Mute begins to learn both techniques, the 8 snake steps and the lion's roar. Gradually, he masters both the techniques. The prisoner is happy for Little Mute, and tells him that now he's finally ready to fight the Wooden Men and leave the Shaolin. Before leaving, the prisoner gives Little Mute a tiny piece of paper and asks him to give it to the lame cashier of the Evergreen medicine shop. In the next scene, Little Mute finally enters the alley to fight the Wooden Men. But everyone is shocked when they see how well Little Mute can fight. Using the skills taught by both his teachers, he defeats the Wooden Men and wins the fight, and can now leave Shaolin. Before leaving Shaolin, Little Mute seeks the blessing of the Master Priest. The Master asks him who is teaching him Kung Fu, as Little Mute is the only student who managed to defeat the Wooden Men in many years. The Master somehow figures it out that Little Mute has been taught by the prisoner inside the cave, and he asks him if the prisoner asked for anything in return for teaching him, but Little Mute promised the prisoner that he will never tell anyone about their secret, so he stays silent. Before leaving, the Master reminds Little Mute that Kung Fu is used to improve mental and physical health, and if anyone uses it for evil purposes then it will only cause death and disasters, and if you use it for the right cause then it will serve justice and save lives. The Master then gives him a bamboo scroll and asks him to go to Windy Hill to search for the Sublime Master. After this, Little Mute visits the Evergreen medicine shop and hands over the piece of paper to the cashier. It turns out that the paper contains a secret message saying, "I am coming, wait for me," and the cashier will take it to the Green Dragon Gang. It is revealed that the prisoner's name is Kang, and he is the leader of the Green Dragon Gang, and Kang was not imprisoned because of his lion's roar technique but because he used this technique to kill innocent people and spread violence. Later, a hotel owner's daughter named Orchid was being harassed by some goons of the Green Dragon Gang. Little Mute steps in and fights off the goons to save Orchid. As a result, the owner offers him to stay at the hotel for as long as he wants. Meanwhile, the prisoner has mastered the lion's roar technique, and using it he escapes out of the cave. One night, the goons come again, as they want to serve Orchid as their leader's mistress. When he arrives, she tries to fight but is unfortunately kidnapped. They also demands the owner for 500 gold coins in return for his daughter, so Little Mute and Orchid's younger brother goes to pay the ransom. But instead, they find the prisoner fighting the Shaolin monks who are trying to catch him again. Unaware that he's a criminal, Little Mute helps Kang to escape by distracting the monks. After this, they tell him about Orchid, and Kang offers to help them, and takes both of them to his friend's house to spend the night, but the house owner's wife doesn't like Kang as he eats too much. But then, Kang sees a bald guy and kills him, mistaking him for a monk, but it turns out that he was just the brother of the house owner. Afterwards he kills off the whole family and also kicks out Little Mute and Orchid's brother out of the house. Both of them then visits the place they were asked to come with the ransom, but no one shows up. They return home disappointed, but then, Orchid comes home unharmed, saying they let her go without any reason. Later, Little Mute remembers that his master told him to take the bamboo scroll to the Windy Hill and find the Sublime Master. Without wasting any time, he goes to the hills and finds a blind master. The master uses his sixth sense and finds that Little Mute is a student of Kang, so he scolds Little Mute for following the wrong path, but also now he will guide him to do the right thing. The priest then starts to tell the story of the prisoner. The priest once used to be the head of the monastery and Kang was his student. There was a time when Kang rebelled against the Shaolin monastery and formed the Green Dragon Gang, but he was captured by the monks and was imprisoned. The head master felt guilty and blamed himself for failing his student, so he blinded himself and left the monastery to live in the hills as a hermit, but still he will help to save the monastery. The present headmaster arrives there and informs the blind master that Kang has started killing people who were responsible for his imprisonment and now wants to take revenge from the Shaolin monks. He thinks that the monks are not strong enough to fight him as he now have mastered the lion's roar technique. The blind master then takes out a book containing the ultimate martial arts fighting style, and while Kang one by one defeats his enemies and plans to destroy the monastery, Little Mute masters this technique for the next few years under the guidance of present headmaster. The time comes, Kang arrives with his gang and is ready to destroy the Shaolin monastery. But Little Mute is there to stop him. Kang reveals that he was the masked bandit who killed his father. This enrages Little Mute, and he speaks out revealing that he is not mute but had taken a pledge that he will never say a word until he finds his father's killer. A very intense fight emerges between the two, but Little Mute can defend against Kang as he knows all the techniques and moves. Little Mute avoids killing Kang even after getting many chances but still manages to dominate him. He offers to spare Kang's life only if he promises to spend the rest of his life working in the Shaolin monastery. Surprisingly, Kang accepts his defeat and says he is proud that his student learned very well, but just when Little Mute was distracted, Kang gets a chance and proceeds to kill him by a final blow in the throat. But Little Mute moves and Kang accidentally hits himself. The attack was so strong it kills him right away. And as their leader is now dead, the whole Green Dragon gang runs away in fear. In the final scene, Little Not So Mute returns to the monastery and is ready to become a monk. This is where the movie ends. Subscribe to the channel if you love movies, like and share the video, we appreciate it. See you again.